Okay, picture this. You've got a historic speech happening, delivered by the leader of the world's largest democracy. You've got this celebrated alliance between two major global players. So, why was Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi about to speak to a room that was practically half empty in the Israeli Knesset? It's a great question. Today, we're going to unpack a diplomatic firestorm that, as it turns out, wasn't really about diplomacy at all. I mean, the tension was so high that, according to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the Indian embassy was, and I'm quoting here, in a panic. A panic. So you've got to wonder, right? What on earth could provoke a boycott this big enough to put a key diplomatic visit right on the brink of disaster? And that really brings us to the core mystery here. Was this whole thing a deliberate diplomatic insult aimed squarely at India? Or was Prime Minister Modi just an unlucky bystander walking right into the crossfire of a really fierce domestic battle that had absolutely nothing to do with him?
So at first, the explanation seemed pretty simple, you know? The initial reports that came out all pointed to one thing, a protest against India's foreign policy.
And look, to be clear, there was a group of Arab and left-leaning lawmakers who were calling for a boycott. Their reasons were pretty straightforward. They were protesting the growing strategic ties between India and Israel, and they weren't happy with New Delhi's position on the Palestinian issue. But here's the thing. This was a much smaller, kind of ideologically driven group. It wasn't the one causing the real panic. And this is really the crucial point. While that smaller policy protest was bubbling up, it was about to get totally overshadowed by a much larger boycott threat. And this one? It was rooted in an internal power struggle that had absolutely nothing to do with India. Okay, so this is where the story takes a really sharp turn. The real drama here wasn't about international relations at all. Nope. It was about a bitter power struggle raging deep inside the Israeli government itself. So you basically have three key players who set this whole thing on a collision course. First, you've got the Knesset speaker, Amir Ohana, and he makes a really controversial decision. Then, in response, you have the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who threatens this massive boycott. And who's caught right in the middle of it all? Well, that would be the Supreme Court President, Isaac Amit, the guy who basically wasn't invited to the party. In this, right here, is the absolute heart of the conflict. See, the government was in the middle of this huge, very contentious plan to overhaul the entire judiciary, basically to give politicians more power over appointing judges. So by snubbing the Supreme Court president, Speaker Ohana was seen as firing a really symbolic shot in that bigger battle. The opposition, for their part, saw it as an attack on democracy itself. And that boycott threat, well, that was their shot right back. So just to be super clear, you had two completely separate protests unfolding at the exact same time. On one hand, you had that small faction protesting foreign policy, but on the other, you had this massive protest from the main opposition, and it was aimed squarely at their own Knesset speaker over a domestic power struggle. And Prime Minister Modi, he was just caught in the middle of it all. So the opposition suddenly had a real dilemma on their hands, right? How do you protest your own government's actions during a huge international event without causing a massive diplomatic incident? Their solution was, well, a very carefully choreographed walkout. Their strategy was pretty surgical, actually. They planned to walk out only during the speeches by their Israeli political rivals. That way, there was no mistaking who their protest was aimed at. But, and this is the really key part, they would then make a point of returning to the chamber for Prime Minister Modi's address. It was a crystal clear signal of respect for him and for the India-Israel alliance. And hey, you don't just have to take my word for it. Here's the confirmation straight from the opposition parties themselves. Their statement makes it absolutely crystal clear. The protest was an internal thing against what they called a disgraceful decision, and they were explicitly planning to honor their guest and the alliance with India. All right, so to really get why everyone was working so hard to avoid a diplomatic mess, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. We need to talk about the India-Israel relationship itself. Because this isn't just any old alliance. It's a deeply strategic one. I mean, this partnership is built on some seriously powerful pillars. You're talking about strategic defense cooperation. India is a huge buyer of Israeli arms. You're talking advanced technology, innovation, billions in bilateral trade, and shared counterterrorism efforts. Heck, Prime Minister Netanyahu himself called it a historic and powerful alliance. That's what was on the line here. And this relationship has been growing and growing fast for more than a decade now, especially since Prime Minister Modi came to power. His first visit back in 2017 was a real turning point, and this second visit, it was all about solidifying that deep, powerful bond.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway here? What actually happens when a country's messy internal politics come crashing head-on into the very prim and proper world of international diplomacy?
Well, the takeaway is pretty clear. What looked to the rest of the world like a potential insult to India was, in reality, just a symptom of a deep political war going on inside Israel. The international stage simply became the latest battlefield for a really bitter domestic fight.
You know, this entire episode really forces us to think about a much bigger, more fundamental question. It's about the relationship between a nation's internal politics and its actual standing on the world stage.
Now, in this case, some pretty careful political maneuvering meant that diplomacy won the day. But it leaves us with a really fascinating question, and it applies to any democracy, really. At what point does all that internal political fighting start to cause real, lasting damage to a country's most crucial international partnerships? It's a tightrope that, really, every single country has to walk.